Trajectories of Governance investigates the relation among local order, governance, and violence in peripheral cities of Colombia and El Salvador from a historical and a comparative perspective. Very briefly described, the book develops an analytical framework and offers a comparative analysis of 4 cases. This analytical framework serves as a sort of heuristic to examine the varying levels of violence and different types of local order in 4 cases or 4 cities. Chalatenango and Sonsonate in El Salvador, and Pereira and Tunja in Colombia. The analysis demonstrates that there is a notable variation in the levels of violence in peripheral cities across cases and also over time. And then based on this analysis of the 4 cases, illustrates how this variation relates to different types of local orders and trajectories of governance. And I obtained this information or this material through direct observation, more than 100 in-depth interviews, focus groups, secondary sources, and process-generated data. Most of this information was collected in 2 rounds of fieldwork. I went first to Colombia in 2017 for the first round or the first state of fieldwork there. Then in 2018 I went to El Salvador, and then in 2019 I visited both countries again, fortunately before COVID, so I was able to collect all this information. So based on this analysis, the book introduces a typology, or I classify the 4 cases following a typology. So I identify 3 types of local order. The first one I already mentioned, the violent order. The second one is a state-led order, and the third one is society-led order. So in the end, we have these 3 types of orders. I define Pereira and Sonsonate as violent orders. Tunja serves to illustrate the case of a state-led order, and Chalatenango illustrates the case of a society-led order. Trajectories of Governance makes 2 contributions, or we can classify the contributions in 2 groups. First, empirical, and here is, directed to the field of city and violence in Latin America, but also beyond, I would say, perhaps the so-called Global South. So the book yields new empirical knowledge for understanding the dynamics and effects of violence in peripheral cities. And I think that by portraying governance as this very dynamic process, where the state is important, but also societal actors are important. The book provides new evidence, for instance, on the role of the state as a co-producer of violence as well, and also the historical and spatial connections between different forms of violence in the region. Additionally, I think that by focusing on these local histories, or by foregrounding the histories of these cities, the book somehow unsettles some narratives or some ideas about the big periodizations of violence in Latin America. For instance, this idea that we have, on the one hand, the old violence that is mostly rural, and this so-called new violence that is mostly urban. And whereas this classification is useful to some extent, I think it also hides, the idea that there are several connections and continuities. And the second contribution is mostly analytical and conceptual. So I think that the book contributes with a new analytical framework to analyze the relationship between order, governance, and violence across time and space. And I think that this alternative somehow strives to transcend the focus on state building to address the multiplicity of actors involved in governance and order-making processes. But also, I think that the book offers a critique to dichotomic visions regarding violence and order, because usually, in most of the traditional perspectives is this idea that violence equates to disorder, or that violence equates to state absence or state failure, or that informality equates to disorder or violence. And the book tries to transcend these ideas or to challenge them and to show this complexity. And also, I think the books emphasize the historical and multi-scalar dynamics of governance and socio-spatial relation.